Good morning and welcome back to the Headwaters of the Comal. We have coming back this week after a 2-week break for the end of the year. Happy New Year, everyone. Before we get started today, I just wanted to remind everyone that we are live and you are welcome to submit questions, any questions that you have over what we've discussed, what we're discussing today, and also what we've discussed in the past in our previous video updates. Please submit your questions either right now or later on, and we'll be happy to answer them. We have a Q&A session at the end of each of these video blogs, and we'd love to have your questions and to be able to find out what you're... What?
I'm here. I heard this is the dating episode. Is
Mason.
that right? Oh, no!
No! It's not the dating episode, dating episode. It's the radiocarbon dating episode.
Oh. So,
I'll take the chocolates, though.
You want the chocolates?
Sure, I'll take
Oh,
them.
okay. Do you want the flowers?
I'll take the flowers.
Well, you can set them aside.
Thank you.
All right, I guess I'll go wait over there then. All right. Bye. I'll see you guys later.
Mason's going to be presenting our radiocarbon section of our video blog today. But first, I'm going to talk about what we have been doing so far this week and present our featured feature. So we have, as I said earlier, we're coming back after a 2-week break. We haven't had a chance to sort of get really in depth at the moment, but we have found some really interesting things just so far this week. Let me give you a quick update as to where our blocks are at the moment. We're in Block A at the moment, and this is where we've been doing the bulk of our excavations for this week. Blocks C and D have been sort of a bit inundated with the rain. We were fortunate to have this covering over Block A that sort of preserved a lot of the rainfall, so we're able to get started in Block A right away. We are just now opening up Block D again. It's dried out a bit, but it's so excavations are so deep that we need to start putting up bracing on either side. So by the time we go back to Block D and sort of explore what's happening over there, you're going to see some retaining walls in that excavation block so we can be safe while we're digging really deep. So Block A, if you may remember from previous episodes, was a giant blanket of burned rock. We're slowly digging through all that burned rock and started excavating levels underneath it. But while we were excavating out that burned rock layer, we found this, which we think is our current featured feature. We think it's some sort of heating element that is underneath the pile of burned rock. So while we were excavating out, we started seeing some of these very, very large rocks right here and here. And if you, it might be difficult to see on the video, but they're cracked in place, and that's one of the signature signs that we look for some sort of intact heating element, to have very large rocks that aren't cracked up into small little bits. They're not angular. You can see they're nice and rounded, and they're cracked in place. And so what we ended up doing is sort of clearing out the dirt past this point to be able to see if we can see some sort of nice shape to the feature. Now, the difficulty with this particular feature is the fact that there's a giant burned rock sort of discard pile sitting on top of it. So we don't know where the discard pile ends and where the heating element begins. And so what we ended up doing is sort of clearing away as much dirt as we can, and then watch for a video blog later, perhaps next week. We're going to try to set up a GoPro camera to be able to sort of document us removing these top layers of rocks to see if we can find that heating element, the intact portion of the heating element underneath. So watch for that video in the future. It should be really exciting. We're hoping to do a time-lapse video so you can kind of see us in action as it goes. So that's our feature. I'm going to walk over and turn it over to Mason, who's going to be talking about radiocarbon dating.
And not the dating.
Yeah, right, not the dating.
Aw, well, that's okay. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining me. Hold on, we're going to let Lauren get over there. We're going to talk about time. You know, it's the new year. You probably didn't hear any of that because the microphone was pointing the other way. Ooh, it's sort of wobbly a little bit. So We're going to talk about time this week. You know, it's the new year. Everybody's taking down their calendars right now, and I think that kind of prompts us to think a little bit about time and the passage of time. And we, in the world of archaeology, deal a lot with time, obviously, in the work that we do, because time is sort of a cultural constant. It's something that we all pass through, and it's something that has remained the same the entire time, and it's something that it's a great manifestation of cultural progress and change by comparing archaeological patterns through time and changes in behaviors and things like that. It gives us an idea of who we are, where we came from, all in the context of time. And so the important part of that is to really figure out how we date things. And again, not the swipe left, swipe right kind of dating, but the how do we figure out how old different aspects of these archaeological sites are? And so I thought I would use this to talk a little bit about some of the different methods that we use. We've talked a lot recently about what are the more imprecise ways of estimating time, and those are called, we like to call those relative dating methods. Those are usually the ones that are used first in excavations like these, and as the name implies, those are, we date different features and artifacts based on how they are relative, their age relative to other sites and other deposits within a site. And so a good example of this would be like on this profile drawing. I'll hold this up here. This is from the, oops, I'm stepping on some wood. There you go. So this profile drawing right here gives you, this is a full vertical profile from here on the site. And artifacts that we find up here toward the top are generally going to be younger than artifacts that we find lower down on the soil column. And so what we do is, as we do these sorts of excavations, we'll sort of start to infer that we're getting into older deposits as we go down, and we can compare that across different portions of the sites as we go. Oh, Mindy's holding something. Oh.
If you're doing seriation, just briefly seriation.
Yeah, difference, and so that's another method of relative data. So what we'll do is we'll compare, and then if we find deposits or artifacts or features that are in this type of a soil, and then we find that exact same type of soil somewhere else on the site, it's a reasonable conclusion that this is roughly the same age. It doesn't always end up that way, but it's pretty close. And so these are all just ways that we roughly approximate the ages of sites as we do these sorts of excavations along, as we move along. Another method is, like Mindy's holding up there, is seriation, which is...
So we just found this projectile point base just earlier today. So we're working on sort of the method of seriation on a daily basis. So what Mason's talking about are sort of working model that younger stuff is up high and older stuff is down low. We can also use methods like sort of mapping out projectile points within various levels of the soil column to sort of figure out how things are similar across the site, and also how styles have changed over time. We use both sort of the levels of the soil column and the projectile point types that we find. Is called seriation, to be able to sort of do a relative dating. Like this particular point was generally used during these two particular time periods. So we find this point and we're assuming that the dirt we're digging in is about that old. So
let me fill up my tank because we're going to move on now.
All right.
To absolute dating. Now absolute dating, which is also called chronometric dating, that's where we get actual calendar dates, or at least years or ranges of years for deposits that are more or less more scientifically solidly established. And so some of the methods that we use for chronometric dating, or essentially, you know, increasing our precision for where we, I can go in the back, that's fine. Let's just do this. Is we'll do, one of them is just to look at historical records. And a great example of that is historians recorded the eruption at Pompeii in 79 AD, and So when we go to that site and we find evidence of that eruption, we know how old it is based on the historical records that were recorded for there. And so we use a lot of historical records for historic age archaeological sites pretty often. And they give us
extremely often.
They give us a lot of good information, and we can get it established to a specific date. Another great method.
We're talking years, sometimes even months if we're really super lucky.
Right, yeah, like using Pompeii as an example, that was a specific day and a specific time of the day when that sort of a thing happened. Another method that archaeologists can use sometimes is using tree rings. We call that dendrochronology. So you can see here, this is a good example. The tree rings, each ring represents a year. Can you see those okay? And as you can see, some rings are real wide, some rings are real narrow, and it changes over time. So specialists have gone back and they found pieces of wood that they have matched the pattern of thick, thin, 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 thick, thick, thin, 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 and the variations are related to the weather conditions in the year that this tree was growing. And they've been able to map, they might find a segment of that same pattern in an older tree, and so they'll then lock that into the next tree, and they'll continue their way back by matching up these patterns. And they've gone back, I wrote it down, like about 8,000 years in some locations. But most of the time it's difficult because it's only, you have to, the species of wood that you find is, each species has its own dendrochronology, and it all changes, and it's a kind of a difficult thing to map out. So most archaeologists use what we like to consider kind of the granddaddy of them all, which is radiocarbon dating. And so because it's kind of the granddaddy of them all, I set up a model to just sort of show how radiocarbon dating works, or at least the principle behind it. Because honestly, I don't know how they like sample it. I just sort of know how it works. And that's what's great about archaeologists is we have to know that these tools are out there. We don't necessarily have to know exactly how they work, because we're not that smart.
There are specialists in the lab that we send all of our samples to, and they're the ones who know exactly how all the machines work and how to be able to return those dates. And they send us a report that has this sample was dates to this range, and so we take that information and incorporate it into our research. But realistically, we're the ones that package it up and send it off to the lab, and then the lab sends it back to us. What they do with it in the lab is a bit of a mystery to us, actually.
Yeah, we just get, what we do is we get reports back. Here's, I just printed out a copy of a report here, and we just get this, and we just sort of look for dates and things like that.
Yep.
I might put this up on the website afterward. You can sort of take a look at a radiocarbon report. But anyway, what we have here is a model of carbon dioxide. And carbon dioxide is all around us. We breathe it out. It's in the atmosphere. And essentially what this is over here, this big tank, is the Earth's atmosphere. And just like the sun's coming down on us right now, there are cosmic rays that come in through the atmosphere, and what they do is they collide against nitrogen molecules that are up in the atmosphere. And I'm going to use red here for the nitrogen. And so this red is going to represent when those cosmic rays hit the nitrogen, they break off. Little bits of those nitrogen molecules break off, and they wind up adhering to the blue carbon. And so it's going to turn the water purple. And so what we have is, when that happens, you have a molecule of carbon that's actually slightly radioactive. And so right now, all of us are breathing in and out radioactive carbon, a small amount.
Teeny amount.
But what winds up happening is because it's radioactive, essentially what it has a half-life. You might have heard about, half-lives, like the video game Half-Life, and that's all about, plutonium and uranium and really, really radioactive stuff. This is not nearly as radioactive, but what it does is this radioactive carbon floats around in the atmosphere, and through normal photosynthesis, right here, that carbon dioxide that plants breathe in includes some of this radioactive carbon in it. It's called carbon-14. The normal carbon molecule is carbon-12. And so what it does is it finds its way, this radioactive carbon finds its way into the food chain. And so what you wind up having is this purple water. Well, I guess it's not really purple. You get the idea. Sort of purple. What happens is plants take in that radioactive carbon, and then animals that eat those plants take in that radioactive carbon, and then animals that eat those animals or those plants continue to take in that carbon. That radioactive carbon keeps finding its way down the food chain, and I'm still running out of, hold on, I don't want to run out. So I'm going to let this fill up for a second. And so what happens is it continues down the food chain. Bodies can maintain a relatively constant amount of carbon dioxide, including that radioactive amount. But then, at some point, that organism dies. And when that organism dies, that ready supply of radioactive carbon stops. And you should see here in a second that that carbon will stop flowing. Maybe.
Yeah, well, it has.
It's slowing down. Well, what happens is the flow of carbon stops, and carbon dioxide, or the radioactive carbon, since I said before it's radioactive, it has a half-life, which means it reduces by half the amount of carbon-14 molecules in the deposit every 5,730 years. And so what winds up happening is the amount of that radioactive carbon in whatever sample you're sampling drops at a known rate, and we send this off to specialists who can actually identify. Oh, I know why it's continuing to run.
It's because you're doing it.
Because of gravity. There we go.
There we
now
go.
It'll stop. So, so essentially, what happens is that carbon dioxide, the radioactive carbon dioxide level drops over time.
At a known rate.
At a known rate, 5,730 years, it'll cut in half. And that means in another 5,730 years, it'll be a quarter of the amount that it was originally. And then it'll be an eighth, and then a 16th, then da-da-da-da-da, and so it goes on. And what winds up happening is they can measure the amount of that radioactive carbon in a sample. And based on proportions, they'll know how old this deposit is. Within a range, usually it's, 40, plus or minus 40 years.
40 years. That's pretty
and
good.
radiocarbon sampling is pretty accurate down to about, I think it's 50,000 years or so.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But it gets
fuzzy the
very,
more
very, very small
Yeah.
samples, and so it gets to be pretty difficult to do it after that. But we usually use, any organic remains will have that radioactive carbon in it. We all have it. Broccoli that we eat probably has a lot more of that carbon because it's so gross.
Are there certain materials or species that keep carbon better?
No, in general, different. They will retain different types of carbon, like grasses versus trees, as I recall. But in general, every organism maintains roughly the same proportion because we're all taking it in at roughly the same rate. And so, but once that organism dies, so if you cut down a tree to build a house, or if you are a person who's died and your bones are left, you're no longer bringing in that radioactive carbon. I'm going to turn this back on. Wait, I'll just do this. And then when that's going on,
then that's when the decay starts kicking in.
That's when that radioactive decay starts. Well, it's going to start overflowing, but that's why I stuck it over the edge, so it's fine.
Yeah.
And so that's one of the big methods that we use a lot is radiocarbon dating. And so we've done several of them here. This is going to start overflowing. There it goes.
So one of the things that we have to keep in mind is that in order for us to be able to do radiocarbon, it has to be an organic item that's dated. So we can't take all of our lithic debris, stone, and be able to radiocarbon date it because it doesn't have the carbon in it. We need to find something that has carbon in it in order to be able to send off those samples to get those radiocarbon dates. So that, like Mason was saying, it can be almost anything that had been alive will have carbon in it. So bone and shell, plant fibers.
Charcoal is a really good one for us.
Excellent for us, because one of the reasons why we like charcoal so much is because one, we can find it. It's a pretty.
I'm going to dump a little bit of this out.
Yeah, go for it. It's an item that we can find a lot of, and we know that it was charcoal. Especially if we find it in these features, we can kind of link the point at which that charcoal became charcoal, died, and the thing that we're trying to date. We can link those two things together very closely, especially if we find them together very closely. And so we can say, oh, that date of that carbon is linked to this feature, and so these two things are linked, and so they happened at the same time. And that's what we're looking for.
So this is kind of the one, that's the one that we use most often. There are a couple other methods that use different properties that use trapped electrons. So we have thermo luminescence, which essentially is, you can use that to date ceramics, which is kind of neat. When ceramics are heated, all these electrons leave the ceramic clay, and then over time, radiation, like those rays that are bombarding the carbon, will actually slowly enter that fragment of clay, that ceramic, and then over time at a known rate. And so over time we can measure how much of those electrons are coming back into the clay, and so we'll know how old they are. Another one that I like to think of is a lot like cockroaches in a gross apartment is optical luminescence dating, which is essentially, it's the same thing, that essentially if sand particles or dirt particles are exposed to light, these electrons scatter and they go and they spread out and they don't come back. But as soon as it gets dark, they start sticking back into those sand particles a little bit at a time, kind of like little cockroaches coming into a kitchen when the lights are off. And so you can actually measure how many of those cockroaches or electrons are inside that sand particle, because those all come in at a fixed and known rate, and we can get the age of the dirt itself using optical luminescence.
That's right, and so that kind of measures at what point the dirt became covered up with other dirt, and then it's not exposed to the surface anymore.
Yeah, and then the last one that we can use sometimes, or at least that I've seen used, is archaeomagnetics, which is essentially a method where clay, the iron molecules in clay will fix to magnetic north whenever it's heated. That also works with ceramics, but also like burned clay. And the North Pole actually moves over time, and we've mapped the position of the North Pole. And so you can actually measure where it was pointing at a specific year, and you'll know when that North Pole was at those locations. Or if you get really old, you can do magnetic reversals, which is, you know,
that's old. Yeah.
That's really old.
That's really
and essentially the Earth's North Pole actually switches back and forth. Over thousands of years. It'll go, so the North Pole will go to south, and then the North Pole will go from south to north again, and it'll go back and forth and back and forth. And that same process where the iron aligns to north, it will reverse over time. And so like with a volcanic eruption or something like that, you can find those iron molecules might be all of a sudden all pointing south, and you'll know that's when this period was, and that could be millions of years back. And so
we're talking paleontological time periods.
Really old. Those are
really
you know, some of the earlier people studies or human ancestor studies.
Human ancestor studies is when it gets that old.
So that's kind of a brief overview of some of the dating methods that we use. And I don't know, do we have any questions?
Any questions so far?
Let me see.
No questions.
Okay. I guess as far as what's going to happen for...
Wait, I have one question.
No question.
Did you do anything archaeology related over the holidays?
None at all.
That's good.
I took a break.
I went to the Alamo, which was sort of archaeology related.
Archaeological related.
And then we did have a question before the filming started, which was how confident are we in the accuracy of these different dating methods? It varies. Dendrochronology we can get confident to within a year. And obviously calendar dates and historical records we can get confident within a year. Radiocarbon dating, it all depends on the quality of the sample, but usually we shoot for something in the plus or minus 30 to 50 year range. So you're looking at
that's pretty good.
100 years.
So, and if you're dealing with a sample that's thousands of years old, you know, the difference between 5,050 and 5,100 is it's a couple of lifetimes, but when we're talking about big giant cultural practices, that margin of error is acceptable.
It's acceptable, and it's usually the most expedient. And then other methods like the thermoluminescence is a little less accurate, but it's also if we don't have any way to, if there's no organic preservation but we have lots of ceramics, it is a way to at least get some dates.
One of the things, the great things about radiocarbon dating is that we have a large sample size. You know, we can get absolute dating, and we also can compare those dates with lots of other radiocarbon dates from different sites all over the region and the state and even the country and even the continent to be able to do large-scale comparisons between sort of cultural practices over time. Some of the other more recently researched strategies that Mason was talking about, like thermoluminescence and things like that, we're still compiling the data set to be able to sort of do some of those comparative large scale
much more of a learning thing.
Yes.
Radiocarbon dating's been around since 1949, so it's become a bit more established.
That's why it's kind of our go-to. That's kind of why.
So I guess what do you got planned for the week ahead?
Well, we're going to continue on excavating underneath Feature 55 here in A. Block D, we're going to move back to as soon as we get the bracing back up on the walls to be able to go super, super deep like we want it to go. C is we're having sort of a few difficulties with C. C's always been our problem block. And so we're trying to see if we might be able to sort of erect a different kind of structure over top of the block to keep the rain out, and we have problems with wind and things like that. So we're hopefully get that in place soon, and we'll be able to sort of get back into C. C's, again, it's problematic, but it's also very promising. It's got different kinds of features in it than we're seeing here in A. So we're super excited at being able to go and excavate some more of that out and be able to do a comparison between that area and this area here.
Yay! All right, well, thank you, everybody. Tune in next week. Be sure to, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, it'd be great if you did. It should be, I think, over there. I'm pointing.
And comments.
And the comments down here.
There.
Ask questions for next time.
Yes, please do. Ask questions and watch next week, and we'll see if we can answer all the questions that you submit.
Great. Thank you. Bye.
All right, thanks.